Hello, good evening. How is everyone doing? This is this is the first inaugural episode of Kojo's Corner. We are at the intersection of people, participation, politics, and power. Our first guest is Chris Erl. Happy to have Chris Erl on this episode. And Chris is going to be talking to us about his new project. But before we get into that, um, today is the National Day of Mourning. Uh, Trying to remember and fight for help for workers. And so we wanted to start off the show by recognizing the day. If you are out and about after 6 o'clock, I know the Hamilton District Labor Council is having an event at City Hall. If you don't get a chance to attend, you can also lay a wreath at the monument that's right at the corner of Bay and Main Street. So please, let's ensure that workers have the safe environment that is their right, and let's make sure that the workplace is safe. We've gone through a whole pandemic with a healthcare system where things weren't safe. So I think it's important to recognize the day, and whether you're a worker, whether you're with management, an employer, an employee, we all deserve a safe working environment. So, just wanted to start off with that. If we're a show that talks about people, participation, power, and politics, we definitely have to remember workers and what they are doing, and especially when we have public sector workers with the government striking right now across the country. And so that's exactly why unions are important, and that's the work of unions. So solidarity with the PSAC workers. We're with you. We support you 100%. You deserve the wages and the working conditions that you feel will make it safe for you. So, long intro there, but it's very important. And so, Chris, um, you are a historian, you are a political researcher, you are an urban planner, you are a comedian when you write, which I must say is like hard to pull off. So I envy that skill that you have of making people laugh, even though you're writing long pieces, long interesting pieces. And so tell us about this new project that you have, and why you started it.
Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I have to put all those degrees to use. The project came from sort of some conversations with friends about what to do to stay active in the community, especially considering my main platform of actually having conversations was Twitter, and that just continues to explode every day. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And so I wanted to still be able to do the kind of things that I did during the municipal election, like focusing on the school board elections, how I was able to do some research on all the different candidates that people usually don't think about, or that may not have the same kind of presence that candidates for mayor and council have, and put a lot of information about them out there to help people make informed decisions and to participate actively in the civic democratic process. So this project is an attempt to look at the big things that are facing not just Hamilton but the surrounding area, and sometimes internationally, and thinking about how we can critically look at things with a little bit of humor, with a little bit of background, with a little bit of history, with all the kind of things that I'm looking for when I'm trying to make a decision, right? And so the project, I call it the Sewer Socialists because it's named after a group of left wing municipal political actors in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who got elected in the early 1900s. And their whole thing, even though they were socialists, what they wanted to do was make sure that the urban environment was safe, healthy, and clean for everyday people. So they started building, public housing. They started building new public amenities for people. They had people elected to the school board who really wanted to change schooling, and the the name comes from the fact that they improved the city's wastewater treatment so much, and they wouldn't stop talking about it. That the one of the founders of the Socialist Party just said, "Ah, these guys only care about sewers." But it's because these are the things that actually matter to everyday people, right? If something breaks in the municipality, if the sidewalk is cracked, if there's a pothole in the road, if the sewers don't work properly, as we well know in Hamilton, if they start overflowing and ruining our incredibly fragile local environment, then people sit up and take notice. And so I
Mhm.
think it's important to actually have a resource so that people can get that background. And I'm very explicit about where I come from. This is from a progressive, leftist, environmentalist, perspective on the city we have. And I think it provides a little something to the urban dialogue that we may not have had otherwise.
Mhm. So let me ask the question here. I think this is something that even I think about. Um, you use the term progressive, and if I were to get a little controversial here, I personally I feel like that term is nebulous, right? Because some everybody can be progressive. There are levels to it, right? So when you say progressive, what like what do you mean?
Yeah, that is one of those terms that you can it's kind of like a Rorschach test. You can apply your own idea to it, right? Uh, Progressive, generally speaking, to me, is somebody who wants to fight for the rights of everybody in our community, that wants to ensure that we are focusing on investments in our community, looking at every dollar spent in our community as an investment in the people in our community, that considers the environment as something that we need to actually be paying attention to, that can't be an afterthought, that centers racial, social, gender-based justice in everything that we do, and making sure that everybody has a say. And ultimately, it is radically democratic. It is entirely dedicated to the democratic process, dialogue, debate, voting, participating in every possible way. A progressive in the modern sense is somebody who must be at their core democratic. And I think that's what I see a progressive as, because so many other terms are loaded as well. I mean, you use the word socialist by itself, and a lot of people's backs immediately go up. They may agree with 95% of the things you talk about. Providing opportunities for regular people, making sure that we have democracy not just in our government but in our workplaces and our homes. Providing people with options for how they get around, options for where they live, options for where they work, providing people with real options. You can say all these things and people might agree. Then you slap the word socialist on it and everyone's like, well, somebody's a Soviet. And I think that's the big issue, is that we don't have that nuance in our words anymore. That especially with social media, people just see a word and they snap and automatically assume something. And
Mhm.
so it's difficult to use words like progressive, like socialist, like any of the words that we use, and have them mean exactly what you want them to, because somebody's going to take them and twist them.
So let's hone in on Hamilton, because I think this is one of the things and full disclosure, I subscribe to your new project. I think is very informative. My favorite piece is the one about the Lux brothers. I was so intrigued by that, but we'll save that for another time. So let's hone in on Hamilton. I remember the previous council. Former Mayor Deliani said it was a left council. We're not going to go there, but if we hone in again on our current situation, again, dealing with this idea of centering democratic values and ensuring that investments are made in people, and that there's a responsive government, right, that meets the needs of people. Where do you see our current council? Because there's some evidence to say that it is not on the right track. For example, the living wage discussion around students, a number of folks, and let me get the numbers right. Don't wanna we had counselors from wards 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, and 14 vote against something that is like a tangible thing that improves the affordability issue, right? So what's your analysis of our current council?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, full disclosure, I'm quite friendly with a lot of the current council, and if not friendly, then rather supportive of, because they've, in many cases they've proven that some of them have been doing some really wonderful work. I mean, wards 1, 2, 3, 13. You've got some really great folks who are doing really impressive work and are constantly pushing against a culture of apathy at City Hall. That's the main problem, is that over successive terms of council, we have the same figures returned again and again and again. I always like to remind people, Tom Jackson has been in office longer than I've been alive. He was elected in 1988. 3 years after my parents got married. He's been on council for a long time, and for many years we had the same people returned again and again and again, and staff became worn down by the culture at City Hall. There was a lot of performance, there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of pushing responsibilities off to the next council. I remember hearing about ward boundary changes in 2006. No, we got to push it back. Okay, maybe 2010. Okay, maybe 2014. Every single council up until a certain point has pushed a lot of things, and so staff became extremely discouraged. I worked for a summer at City Hall and watched some of the staff there, people who have a lot of technical expertise. They have degrees in engineering and planning, in architecture, and all of the things that we need to build a great functioning city, but they've been worn down by the culture. And so, for as much as we have some really wonderful counselors doing really incredible work right now, there needs to be a cultural shift at City Hall. The problem is there's still a core group of very small c conservative counselors who are very cautious about making any significant changes. You're seeing it from some
What
of the.
sorry, what do you
Yeah, go
mean
ahead.
by small c? Because we want people to know, yeah, what do you mean by small c?
Sure. I mean, to get a little controversial, you've got folks like, Matt Francis and John Paul Danko, who are readily associated with the Liberal Party, but they've taken a small c conservative stance on things.
Okay.
Or you've got folks like, Brad Clark, who obviously was a conservative cabinet minister, and Tom Jackson, who ran for the Conservatives. They still take a more conservative approach to some things. To Brad Clark's credit, he has been somewhat forward thinking on the sprawl issue, but in most other cases, it's a more conservative approach. And people like Esther Pauls, again, conservative candidate in the past. And so, these folks, even though they may have affiliations with particular political parties, they can take that kind of stance. You saw that with Vito Scro. Vito Scro had a right-wing populist campaign for mayor in 2018. Stop the LRT, reduce the number of councillors, the usual kind of stuff. But then ended up running for the federal Liberals, right? So you see that kind of perspective amongst some of the members of council. And I think still having that, and still not entirely being able to work across those lines, has made it difficult for council to effectively move forward on things that a lot of Hamiltonians expect them to move forward on. So I think we're going to see a little bit more debate and dialogue over the next couple of years until more progressives are elected or there's a cultural shift at City Hall.
So let's dive into the property taxes then. I wrote a piece about it. It was interesting because I've usually I write some pieces, but this was probably the one that got a lot of attention. And my main thesis or my main argument in the thing was, look, people can vote yes or no for something. However, like, don't sit through a 4-month process and not offer any suggestions. And if I'm to quote you, Mr. Councillor Jackson has been there since '88, and also votes no. Like, it's his prerogative to vote no. Again, the thesis is, when you vote no and you haven't offered any solutions, or you've been part of the problems, how are you now telling us that this is why you are voting no? So what do we do with this property taxes thing? You have that happening at council, and then you have other, as you noted in your writings, you have other people just using labels, tax and spend. uh what was the other one? You have a social work council. Like, how do you kind of see this? And you have the small c conservatives who also masquerade as progressives in some areas. So how do you, yeah, how do you see through this, or how do you analyze this?
Yeah, that's a lot of the performative politics we've seen from far too many members of council. They will enthusiastically support increasing the police budget without question, but then vote against the overall budget and not really provide anything. The issue is, as people like, Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Alex Wilson have said, we have for far too long undertaxed and underspent on essential services. The reason that our roads are in the shape they are, and the reason that we have so many problems with our sewer system, is because successive councils have failed to do their responsibility because they didn't want to be unpopular and tax people more. The provincial government consistently downloads things to the municipality because they don't want to be unpopular and raise taxes. So, what we have is a council that has put off doing necessary work for a long time. And this year, the bill came due. We needed to spend on the things that were in the budget. And if we didn't, then we would continue to see a decline of the services that the city provides. I've often cautioned people we are about to enter into another age of austerity in the city. Hamilton has had many ages of austerity. One of the worst was in the 90s when the city stopped spending on things and instead expected people to kind of pick up the pieces on their own. And that's why the city, growing up in Hamilton, it felt like the city was stuck in the 80s for a while because we just couldn't update things. We couldn't change things. We weren't able to effectively spend on the things that people expected us to spend on. And so the council this time very rightly said we need to correct this imbalance now, and we need to do so for the betterment of all Hamiltonians. So, for some councillors to sit back and say, I'm not going to vote for this because I don't want to look unpopular in my ward, what they're doing is simply saying, I am carrying on the tradition of apathy and a tradition that has abrogated its responsibility to Hamiltonians to effectively provide services to the people of the city. And, good on the councillors who voted yes to the budget for seeing the need to change things.
So let me up the complexity of this thing, because for those that don't know, I was once a candidate. And one of the things that always, and it's going to stick with me forever, was that you literally had people saying, look, I'm paying taxes 7,000, 6,000, and I don't my roads are not being fixed. I don't see anything improving. There's SHIT stuff in the water. Like, so why should I be subjected to a tax increase when things are not improving? But then at the same time too, they are also supportive of the people that are not improving the thing, right? So how do you like where do we go from here? Like what's the solution? Because I see that people are like, yeah, I'm tapped out. Like if you're a senior living on fixed incomes, even if you're a family that's working, it's like there's the water is not flowing anymore. So when you see stuff like this, how am I supposed to maintain paying and all of these things? But then yet uh, a third of people are voting in the provincial by election in Hamilton. We didn't even get to 20%. So what do we do here? You have 3 degrees. Give us the solutions.
I don't want to brag. It is four, but that
Oh, okay. Then give us more solutions.
well, I don't know. As somebody with about $50,000 in student debt, I mean, no, I think
Yeah.
um, the idea is that it's a twofold issue, right? Number one, there can be efficiencies found in the system, right? The system is slightly inefficient the way it operates right now. We can easily take a look at the way City Hall is operating and see if there can't be things that could be streamlined, things that could be automated. We've got a lot of things that are happening at City Hall that require multiple people to check off on it when it in reality doesn't need that. Just as an example, I'm the president of the Strathcona Community Council, and we organized a community cleanup just before Earth Day, and there was a breakdown in the chain of communication, and it ended up with the bags of litter that people diligently went out and cleaned up across our community ended up not getting picked up on time. And it turns out that one department wasn't talking to the other department, didn't know that this department was doing this thing. It was just sort of a back and forth that shows that we could streamline our communications at City Hall and make it so that it's not so difficult to get an answer on something. You hear that from people who want to start businesses. You hear that from people who want to do minor changes to their homes, people who want to build secondary units, for example, increasing density in their neighborhood. They have to jump through so many hoops that it just becomes a nuisance to deal with. So we can find efficiencies there. But the second thing is reframing our conversations on taxing, on government expenditures as an investment in people. Every dollar that people pay goes into the community and ends up creating jobs, providing opportunities, doing things that make our community stronger. It is a contribution to our community to improve it and to provide services back to the people who pay. So it's about reframing those conversations. I mean, a big part of the reason that we have high property taxes is because of the inefficient way we've built. We are subsidizing sprawl. We are essentially giving a blank check to all the big developers in this city, many of whom donated very vigorously to municipal candidates.
We'll get
Yeah,
to that later.
we will. Yeah, and that's going to be an addition of the newsletter coming up. But we subsidize sprawl, we give money to the wrong things, and we aren't effectively spending the money we have. People elect councillors and the mayor and school trustees to be efficient stewards of public resources. It's not to say taxes have to come down or money has to go right back to people, because we live in a community and we should be investing in our community. But we need to prove that we can do it better in order for people to have trust in the system. And when you get trust back in the system, you'll see voter turnout increase again.
Mhm. So we have someone watching. David Dawson says flip the income tax pyramid. Federal income tax goes to municipalities, and the prime minister can beg the districts for leftover for war. I don't.
That's it makes a lot of sense, right? If a municipality is providing you with the basic day-to-day stuff that you need to survive, they provide you with roads, public transit, trash collection. They make sure that our streets are clean. They make sure that our sewage is dealt with effectively. They provide us drinking water. I mean, the municipality provides you with more things on the day to day, but they aren't included in the Constitution. And so they have no taxation powers at all. And that's the problem.
Mhm.
American cities, like New York City, can throw a sales tax on sugary drinks and use that to fund, different programs. And New York City actually does this really wonderful thing where they get citizens to participate in enforcing the traffic laws. So if you see somebody parked in a bike lane, you take a picture of the car, you take a picture of the license plate, you upload it to an app in New York, and you get half the ticket, whatever the person pays on the ticket.
Oh.
So it's like, there are different ways that municipalities can make money in the states that you can't do in Canada.
So, and I think maybe the broader point here is that we need to reconfigure the role of municipalities here in Canada. One of the things that I suggested during the campaign was that, what municipalities, like, I think about, like, climate change. And there's this company that is using kinetic energy to generate electricity. And I'm like, municipalities should look into this, because imagine there's, like, that blackout that happened a couple of years ago. You're not depending on some private entity to get things going, right? So it's like this kind of community model of, how do we make sure that when something goes awry, everybody can participate, right? Which I guess is the example of that New York. I would love to get a piece of that ticket money.
Oh yeah, as a cyclist in Hamilton, I'd that'd pay my rent sometimes, I think.
So let's ask a serious question in terms of, if we were interested in changing the role of the municipality, would that be a provincial matter or a federal matter in terms of changing the constitution?
Changing the Constitution would require both the federal and provincial governments to sort of get on board. You'd have to do it at the federal level, and then it would have to go to each of the provinces. And 7 out of 10 of the Canadian provinces, representing at least 50% of the population, I believe, would need to vote in favor. So you need to get legislatures across the country to sign on. There are simpler ways to do it. Uh, for example, there's the City of Toronto Act, which provides the City
Yeah.
of Toronto more responsibilities, or more in terms of what they can do, as opposed to regular municipalities in Ontario. If I was ever running for office, one of the things that I would promote is going as municipal councillors to Queen's Park and advocating for a City of Hamilton Act, so that we finally get some of the powers that we deserve to run efficiently. The problem is, when you have a provincial government like the one we have now, and the rules are just completely out the window, right? Doug Ford micromanages the City of Toronto, because in reality he wanted to be the mayor of Toronto, and so he micromanages the City of Toronto, and you run the risk of having future provincial governments continue to micromanage municipalities. So what you would need is an act signed by a provincial government that would be willing to uphold that, right? Quebec has something very similar, right? The city of Montreal has a lot more powers than a regular municipality in Quebec. So there are things that we can do like that, but ultimately we need a wholesale review of the Canadian Constitution to reflect the reality of life in 2023. I mean, the thing was written in 1867, so there's some improvements that can be
Yeah,
made.
and we know a lot has changed from from 1800s to 2023. I think David is saying no need for provincial level of government if municipalities get it straight. City districts, healthcare, education, and I think in New York, that kind of happens, right? Like the municipalities have say over the education system and what have you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I'm agreeing. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots there. So let's transition into provincial, right? So we just had a Hamilton center by election. Everybody knows who I supported. Let's just make it clear. But however, you had some data showing what happened. Can you give us, some insights into, or some summary of the data that you gleaned from all the polling results?
Yeah, so the by-election was very interesting. I mean, it was it got quite heated there at the end. But the interesting thing with the by-election results is that we saw very 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 low voter turnout. And very low voter turnout uh, isn't necessarily great for anything. Certainly not for the for our the health of our provincial democracy overall. But ultimately, one of the things that I thought was interesting, if I can find the actual maps I made, they're somewhere. The
Yeah.
thing that was interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're looking for it, I can give a quick overview, and then you can jump in. So basically, Sarah MPP Sarah Jama won every poll. I think liberal candidate Dedri Pike came in second, followed by conservative candidate, and then Green Party candidate Lucia Antinuano. And yes, and so you saw that there were the even though the Green Party came in fourth, they did have some good results in certain areas of the riding. So, do you have the maps ready to go?
Yeah, so the yeah, Sarah did win every poll. There was one that was extremely close. It was a one vote difference, and that's Kirkendall South, so between the escarpment and Aberdeen. But Sarah's campaign, she had a rock star team helping with everything. Really wonderful folks, a lot of whom I know and are good friends. So I think they did a really wonderful job. Plus, they had a great candidate who's been deeply involved in the community for a very long time, and so that
A
it
long
shows
time.
in the yeah, it shows in the results, right? Deirdre Pike ran a strong campaign for a candidate who didn't run in the last election but ran in 2018, and then was also running with a party that didn't have a leader, right? That was the interesting thing, is that not having a leader made it a little bit challenging for her to distinguish herself. Plus, the policies of the Liberal Party have kind of been all over the place, right? Sometimes they're center right, sometimes they're center left, sometimes they're just whatever they want to be. So I think that was really interesting. The Green candidate, Lucia, was a very impressive candidate. A really really wonderful candidate, and it shows that there was a fair amount of agreement between the New Democrats and the Greens on things. And if we actually had real electoral reform, you could see somebody like Lucia in the legislature working with somebody like Sarah, right? So if we had a proper electoral system, real proportional representation, I think they would work well together and bring different lenses to the important issues that we face as Hamiltonians. The interesting thing was, because there was low voter turnout, that always impacts the NDP in a negative way. So it was actually very impressive that the New Democrats were able to pick up in certain parts of the riding. So they were actually able to win more votes than Andrea Horwath could, or at least a higher percentage of the vote than Andrea Horwath could in some of the eastern parts of Hamilton Center. So I mean, ultimately, it was a really interesting election. The thing that's such a shame is the low voter turnout. That's always going to
Mm.
be just, it's going to be killer.
So I know this might be hard, but you are the data person. You are the person that has 4 degrees to give us all the answers. What do you see the landscape looking like in 2026? We have MPP Sarah Jama, MPP Monique Taylor, MPP Sandy Shaw, MPP Neil Lumsden, MPP Donna Skelly. Are we going to is it going to be the same in 2026, or do you think um with all the stuff that's happening now, the things might change? Just your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think it all depends on whether or not the provincial riding boundaries match the new federal ones, right? Because Flamborough Glanbrook is getting a little bit longer. It's still sort of a weird kind of wraparound thing, and there are a couple changes to things like Hamilton East and a few to Hamilton Center. So there are going to be some small changes. I think a lot of it depends on the the strength of the Liberal Party. Rather unfortunately, I think they can draw a lot of votes from other campaigns, but they aren't necessarily in a position to win right now. It really looks like the Ontario Liberals are going very much so the same way that a lot of other liberal parties have gone across the country, and a lot of provincial governments, a lot of provincial legislatures you're seeing are split between two parties, usually the New Democrats and some sort of right wing coalition on the other side. So there's a possibility that that happens. I think a lot of it depends on what Ford does or doesn't do. He is eminently controversial. That man is he just loves being controversial, and if he continues to meddle in Toronto's affairs, if there are more scandals and more problems and more pushback from Ontarians, you could definitely see the Conservatives, if not knocked down to minority, then turfed entirely. We'll have to see how Merritt Stiles performs as leader of the NDP. The good thing is we've got some really wonderful New Democrats representing Hamilton right now. Whether or not they'll be running again in 2026 is another issue. I'm sure that Sarah will, but I know in terms of other candidates, if they do decide to retire or move to a different level of government, then it'll all depend on the kind of folks that are going to be running in their place. So, if we've got some young, dynamic, interesting candidates, I could easily see not only the three NDP ridings staying that way, but I think Neil Lumsden's certainly the most vulnerable conservative in the Hamilton area.
Mhm. So before we wrap up on the provincial side of things, like what chance or what in what environment do we see things change in Flamborough or Glambo?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That the there's going to have to be a lot of cross-party dialogue, and this is something that this may not necessarily be the the way that things will go, but I am a big fan of cooperation between different political groups of very similar ideals to defeat candidates that are actively harmful to the community, right? And I see with the Conservatives' push to eviscerate the green belt, to open land up to developers. They are being almost purposefully destructive to Hamilton's environment, to the environment of the province, despite their plans for tiny little provincial parks here and there. What we really need is a provincial government that will protect the green space we have, enable cities to build the missing middle and all of the things that are necessary to grow within the urban footprint we have, and really invest in expanding green space and working with indigenous communities through land back and other processes to provide space for future generations in our local environment. And Donna Skelly has been one of the biggest proponents of the Conservative Party's plans on around the Hamilton area. So I'd encourage all the different political groups out there to work together, but I know that's very difficult because there are a lot of egos in political parties that make it difficult to do that. I think a really strong candidate from one of the parties who can reach out to a lot of the different groups in Flamborough Glanbrook, I think a really strong candidate could make a very impressive showing. We've seen it in the past, right? We've seen it in the past federally where conservative candidates come very close to losing. And I think it's certainly possible if a lot of the, again, progressive folks in Hamilton put some of their resources and their time and their energy into Flamborough Glanbrook. I think you could definitely see some change.
Okay. Well, 2026, long time away. But again, you gotta start somewhere. You gotta start before the rates drop so that people are not scrambling and I know there was one time during the provincial election there was, what is it, all but conservative or something like that, ABC or whatever it was. But then, anyways, let me go off. So um let's go back to Toronto. We have a mayoral by-election happening. um what are your early assessments of that? You live in Hamilton, but you're connected there through your pursuits in education. So give us an early take on who you think is going to lead, what the issues are. I think we've seen some candidates come forward, and yeah, just tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, no, as a born and raised Hamiltonian, I kind of just I try to avoid some of the Toronto stuff, but in much the same way that I think it was Pierre Trudeau who said, when the United States sneezes, Canada gets a cold. In much the same way that that's the case when something happens in Toronto, it ripples across the lake, right? And we are impacted by what happens. So many Hamiltonians go into Toronto for work and for to see shows and hang out with friends. Something I'm actually going to be doing soon. It's we have to pay attention to what's going on there. The big candidates right now, Olivia Chow is by far the front runner, and that's because she's run in the past, has the name recognition, has the progressive cred to actually win that race. The issue is, in the past, her campaigns have sometimes faltered because they've tried to be a little bit more moderate than I think what a lot of people wanted, and so people weren't as enthusiastic about voting for her. You have people like Anna Bilal, and Josh Matlow, Brad Bradford, all these city councilors who are running. Brad Bradford is his mother is a Liberal MP, and he was an urban planner. He's a councillor in the Beaches area. He's taking a little bit more of a center-right approach. His whole campaign is less talk, more action, which is strange because he's a planner. And one of the things they teach us in planning school is you got to talk through things because we have to get to a reasonable position on issues. Josh Matlow is actually coming out with some really impressive stuff. And the yesterday's edition of the newsletter talked about how his whole idea on housing, his plans are somewhat more ambitious than Olivia Chow's because he's talking about getting the city back into the business of building housing. So even if Olivia wins, she would be wise to draw on Matlow's experience in that. And then you've got some right-wing candidates like Mark Saunders, the former Toronto police chief, who was a conservative candidate in the last election. And Anthony Fury, who was a Sun columnist who's running sort of a much, much further right-wing campaign, very law and order, very um, that sort of thing. I think a lot of Torontonians they're worried right now. People weren't expecting this by-election, and this by-election is coming at a time when, there's a lot more news about crime on the TTC, a lot of really upsetting incidents that have happened. And so some people are worried about that. Obviously all these things that are happening, the issues on the TTC, the things that, things are breaking down, things aren't working, people are being harmed. These are symptoms of a larger social problem, a lack of opportunities for people, lack of investment in communities. Again, same like Hamilton, Toronto hasn't effectively provided for social services for a long time. But people often do the knee-jerk thing where they're like, okay, well, we just need more police. But again, the thing is, you call the police when a crime has occurred. You call the police after someone's been harmed, after property's been damaged, after something bad has occurred. What you want to do is stop those things. And so you've got a couple candidates out there saying we have to provide more police because that's the only thing that'll solve crime. It doesn't solve crime. It just provides you with recourse after a crime's been committed. So what the progressive candidates really need to do is talk about how they're going to invest in social services. Right now, the campaigns are slow, but I hope to see Olivia Chow's campaign really focusing in on that. I think she's probably the progressive choice for a lot of people. That's why, Gil Penalosa, who ran in the mayoral election in 2022, decided not to run and instead endorsed her. He's an urbanist, very forward-thinking, very progressive, and said she's the best choice. I'm hoping that some of the other progressives maybe drop out and support her, or at least provide that campaign a little bit of support, because we could have the same thing that we've seen in Toronto for years. a progressive runs, a moderate runs, and a hard right winger runs, and then the moderate and the hard right winger are the two who end up coming up the uh, becoming the candidate to beat. So I'm optimistic that Olivia's campaign is going to be on track and very progressive this time. I hope.
Okay. So I have two more follow-ups. So let's say, right, Olivia flames out. Who would be the the other progressive candidate that has a high probability of winning, and who would be the conservative candidate that would have a high probability of winning?
Yeah, I'm thinking Josh Matlow has a really good chance. He's polling in the 10 to 15% range. Anna Bilal is a bit more of a centrist. She's kind of trying to replicate John Tory's campaign, but so is Brad Bradford from a slightly righter wing uh, perspective. So I'm thinking, if Olivia's campaign does well and she's able to reach out to people in the suburbs, reach out to the folks that she needs to reach out to, she's the number one. But hopefully, Matt Lowe's able to fill in gaps if she can't. But then, Anna Bilal and Mark Saunders, I think, would be the other two. So Mark Saunders is probably the conservative candidate to beat, despite the fact that Anthony Fury is getting, the coveted endorsement of people like Jordan Peterson and all them. So it seems like Mark Saunders' campaign. He's getting some help from some Hamilton-based conservative activists, from what I understand.
Mhm.
So we'll see what happens with that. But a lot of the rhetoric is around defunding supervised consumption sites and giving more money to the police, getting rid of bike lanes and providing more money for cars. It's just the same old
It,
stuff.
it reminds me of something that happened in Hamilton in Ward 3 and Ward 14. Anyways, let's not go there.
Fair.
um, quick question. Quick question. Um, and I think David mentioned this. He says Canadian voters are terribly uninformed to vote answer some of these questions, like who takes care of your water, who takes care of education, blah blah blah, right? And we see this sometimes, right? Everybody says Hamilton sucks because of the NDP, and it's like, but they are not in government. So, anyways, so why do you? I've been thinking about this a lot. Why is it that certain times, or most often than not, voters, or well, I shouldn't say voters, in broader cases, people end up voting for a candidate that doesn't exude the broad analysis and the thought and care that is needed for a high priority job like a mayor or like a counselor, right? Like we tend to go with the simplistic thing, and then we then say Hamilton never progresses. But we've been voting the same people that have been there for years and years. So what is going on there, right? Like, because sometimes it's just mind-boggling, right? Because it's like, if every time I plant a seed and it doesn't grow, I might as well be like, you know what? I ain't gonna plant this seed no more. I'm gonna look for another type of seed and plant it. But we always go with the same thing, right? Like John Tory has had this long stagnant Toronto effect. And then you have somebody like Anna Bilal that's saying, I'm gonna be like John Tory. You have Bradford saying, John Tory, but I'm more faster. Like, why do we see this happen time and time again?
Yeah, that is the the $1 million question, and if you answer that question correctly, you might be able to buy a house in Hamilton. But the the regular voting public they got a lot of things going on, right? You have to get the kids to soccer practice. You have to make sure that dinner is made. You have to make sure that your cat has food because the cat's going to scream otherwise. You gotta make sure that the eaves troughs are clean. That there's so much stuff that people have to worry about in their day to day, especially regular working folks, people who work retail jobs, people who have to take the bus to work, people who've got to do all this stuff. I mean, regular folks sometimes just don't have the capacity to be up on the minutia of politics all the time. The challenge is when they go to vote, sometimes people look at the names, they see somebody familiar, and they go, oh, well, okay, I know that they're the person who's in now, and nothing has burned down recently, so I'll just let them do it again. It's the same reason we had Mayor Bob Morrow for as long as we did in Hamilton. The the voting public votes often based on name recognition and based on the catchiness of the slogans. It helps that a lot of the big politicians who've been in forever raise the most money come election time. They just get inundated with money from every developer, everybody who's got something before the city. They get all this money from their usual network, and then they can blanket their ward or blanket the entire city in flyers and signs, and they got a whole team that they can pay, and it kind of changes the dynamic, right? It's less democratic in that respect because regular people who want to participate in the system, they just don't have the resources to go out there and say, yeah, okay, I'm going to raise $30,000 to do this. In Toronto, if you want to run for mayor, every serious candidate who runs for mayor will try to raise about $1 million. Raising a million is just
Yeah, that's yeah. Yeah. So let's get you out on this. So what do we do? I mean, I'll use myself as a guinea pig, you know. Um we spoke to people during the campaign. There were some people that didn't even know there was an election. There was an election happening. So what can we do? Because it's like you, yes, I get it. Everybody is busy. Not all of us have the inclination to tune in to an 8 hour council meeting. Not all of us, follow what's going on, right? So like what else can we do? Because if we don't address this, you know, um we just let some politicians off the hook, you know, because to be honest, and this is not even an shattering statement, some politicians just do the bare minimum, you know. I look at MPP Sarah Jama, doesn't have an office, but is out there going to having pop-up office hours. Like there are councillors that don't even show up anywhere, right? So it's like I don't want to um hope and pray for a candidate that is like, I'm going to be out there, I want to involve all community members. Like what else can be done structurally or systematically to ensure that at least people have value back for the people they are electing? Because you know, when your school is shut down, that's an impact. When stuff is in the water, that's an impact. Like when your road, go down Barton Street, go down Upper James, go down pick any street in this city, and you are like, man, we are a $1 billion corporation and we can't get this stuff figured out. Then what are we doing here?
Mhm. Yeah, there are a lot of things that we can try. Some of them people may not like. The number one thing that could be tried that almost everybody would universally reject is the best way to get information out there about what's happening at city council, the fact that there's an election, and where candidates stand are political parties. People hate the idea of political parties at the municipal level for completely uh, ridiculous reasons. People hate the idea of political parties because they automatically think, oh, that means the liberals and conservatives will come in. People just need to live in Vancouver or Montreal to see that that isn't the case. In Vancouver and Montreal, there are local political parties that do not operate anywhere else but their municipality. They have names like Projet Montréal, One City, ABC Vancouver. These are names that people in Hamilton wouldn't ever hear, but these are organizations that do the work in between elections to find qualified candidates, make sure that there is a coherent platform. Say, if you vote for this slate of people, these are the things we will do. Montreal Mayor Valerie Plante is probably the most impressive municipal politician in Canada. She has gotten bike lanes built. She's building affordable housing for people. She is trying to fix the problems in Montreal. Montreal, a city that was gripped by corruption for years, literal corruption. There were actual provincial inquiries that sent most of their mayors to jail. She's been able to fix that. And she did so with Projet Montréal, a left-leaning, environmentalist, urbanist party that cares about what happens in Montreal. They nominate candidates, they have a platform, they make people aware of what's going on. People in Ontario hate that because this is, don't worry, this will be in a book that I'm writing at some point, but the idea is that in Ontario,
Do we get the first copy?
you will get the first copy. Definitely. In Ontario, labor-leaning candidates in the 1910s to 1930s ran candidates to try to make life better for working people, much like the Sewer Socialists did. And business people organized against them, shot them down, and said, we need nonpartisanship in local government. Local government should operate like a business. Look at how well that's worked. But in Ontario, people still don't like that. So we've got things like Progress Toronto and Horizon Ottawa. These are not necessarily parties, but they're organizations of progressives that make people aware of issues. Look at some of the stuff Horizon Ottawa is doing, making people aware of the tax breaks that are going to hotels, the kind of nonsense that happens at Ottawa City Council. They're making people aware in between elections to raise awareness. I think that's one of the best things that we could do.
So let me I don't know what word I should use. Let me supplement this. So you are saying, in Ontario we don't like that, but I would argue we do it already. It's just that it's not out in the open, right? Like, uh, you know, we take former councillor Chad Collins, right? He's a long time liberal, right? Uh, his successor, MP Francis, Matt Francis, is has organized with him. Like that's an example right there, right? Like, so I would say it's done, but it's not done in the open. It's done secretly. And speaking from experience, there are some business people, right, that get together and say, hey, I think we should think about picking this person to go against that person. So I mean, it is being done, but how do you do it in a more transparent way, right? Like, how would that work? Is this something that has to be provincially mandated, or is this something that just residents have to organize and tip the scale to it being societally acceptable?
Yeah, it's honestly a little bit of both. We need to change the culture around municipal government. That's what happened in British Columbia. These elector organizations, they're called in BC, they were semi-legal. They were kind of, in different spots in the province. But it was only when they elected a premier who was previously a Vancouver City Councillor with one of these, they allowed them and organized them so that Elections British Columbia, their provincial elections body, actually manages these elector organizations, so that every party that's operating in Vancouver, whether it's the Coalition of Progressive Electors, Vancouver Greens, a Better Vancouver, any of these parties that operate at the local level, they are overseen by the provincial elections body. So what we need to do, and this is just sort of thinking long term, we need to get comfortable with the idea of council candidates, trustee candidates, people working together to advance a common agenda, and we just need to keep pushing it, just keep pushing it, and providing people with those options. More importantly, getting those people elected and then showing them how well it works. When councillors caucus before meetings to decide, do we need to have an 8-hour meeting, or can one of us just say the thing that we all think and then we can all vote on it? Things like that would make things more efficient, and it would make the system work a lot better. So what we need to do is we need to build that culture up, and then hopefully that becomes something that the provincial law will allow for. Because right now, any sort of political organizing like that is banned under the Municipal Elections Act. So
Yeah.
groups like Progress Toronto and Horizon Ottawa have to organize as third-party advertisers. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way we can have. One of the earlier editions of the newsletter talked about how, in response to the more right-wing approaches to things like taxes and the municipal spending, things like the councillor budget, we should have a group like a Progress Hamilton or something like that, that organizes between elections, that has people, who are well versed in policy, who can write letters to the spec, who are willing to make these comments and provide the necessary insight into a progressive Hamiltonian's way of looking at things, and help candidates during a municipal election to ensure that we have as many progressive voices as we can. I mean, it's great that we have the ones we do now on city council and on the school board, but to have more of those would be a game changer.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, we can start by making these suggestions, and hopefully some folks that are watching this, it's all on you now. It's all on you. We have Dave saying political parties across three levels of government are horrid. I vote differently for federal, provincial, and local in a political color set. In a political, yeah. I think
Yeah.
there are some folks that do that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, and I think that is absolutely accurate, because you look at the way the parties operate on Parliament Hill, and sometimes, if I had hair, I'd want to rip it out, and that's the you watch the way that some things go. You've got some great political leaders and some awful political leaders in the same party, but we don't necessarily need to have the New Democrats running municipally. Like, we tried that many, 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 many times. We do not need the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Greens, the New Democrats, the People's Party running at the local level. We can have our own unique local parties that speak to the issues of Hamiltonians, right? A party that's able to organize and say, this is how we would fix Sewergate. This is what we would do with LRT. This is how we would improve, let's legalize urban chickens. Let's do these things. Let's talk about the issues that Hamiltonians want to talk about, and draw on people from all across, the existing political parties. That's what Projet Montréal does. They have members of the Bloc, they have members of the Liberals, they have members of the Greens, they have the members of the New Democrats, Quebec Solidaire, all the different groups in Quebec. Anybody who's on an urbanist sort of perspective, they join Projet Montréal. Imagine if we had that in the last election, right? You've got all these
So
people from different parties working together.
yeah, well, you saying that, I just got an image. Bear with me, folks. Hamilton. This is just a podcast show. Don't worry. I just had an image of former Mayor Bob Bettina, former Mayor Larry Deliani, Walter Fairland, and some folks who would also come up with their own version, which is fine. It will be allowed. Hey, it's a democracy. Anybody can get together. But I feel like, don't you think that would further polarize an already polarized situation here in Hamilton, where there's probably going to be the anti woke party.
There probably would be. But the thing is, like, that way you'd know who they are, right? Like, there were, the a lot of the things, especially around Ward 3, right? Like, Walter Ferland had roots in the steelworkers, very, very labor oriented roots, and a lot of his supporters were people who used to be diehard New Democrats, right? But because of the positions he was taking, a little bit more on the small c conservative side of things, it's it changed the dynamic, right? So you've got some people who are like, well, the steel workers taking this approach, but where does this fit into the local scheme of things, right? So you saw that in Vancouver, right? You had a whole bunch of right wing parties run, and one of them won, ABC, a Better City Vancouver, and they ended up winning with a former police officer as their mayoral candidate. But you had other right wing parties also there providing people with different options. So, you know, you could say it might polarize things further, but I mean, you can't get any more polarized than we already are. You've
Mm.
got people who
So
are kind of faking it right now and saying, "Oh, well, no,
mhm,
I'll work with everyone," but they have their own
when
political
they get
ideas.
yeah. So you are just estimating that when you do that now it's clearer for people for voters and residents to say, okay, this person is going to do A, B, C, and D. Whereas now everybody says, I'll lower your taxes. I'm good. They swear a couple of people here and there, they get it, and then we don't know what they are doing, and then 1 minute they are voting against living wage, the next minute they are voting for something else, and it's just all over the place, right? Like you have no sense. And well, that's a good idea. We'll share with folks that are listening. Send us an email, Kojo's Corner, Hammond at gmail.com. Tell us what you think. And yes, it's been a great hour or so. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, very much. We'll have to bring you back again at some point in time. And for those of you that haven't subscribed, can you give us the website to get folks to subscribe?
Yeah, so I tried to get my own custom URL, but right now it's just Chris Erl, that's ERL, .substack.com. And yeah, just search the Sewer Socialists online, and it's also on, again, my rather unused Twitter now. But yeah,
Yeah, and folks, please sign up. Like, someone like me that signed up. Like I said, we didn't talk about it, but I found the discussion around the West Harbor very interesting. I moved to Hamilton in 2001. I've heard stories about Bayfront Park, but just reading that whole history and what happened, it really gives everybody a sense of, like, what's the history of Hamilton, some of the places that we might not know, the Claremont access, like all of these things. Getting a historical perspective is really, really important. So you might not like the title, you might not like Chris, you might not even like me, but sign up, read. And Chris, he's a doctor, but the writing is so interesting. He puts jokes in, he makes fun of himself, he makes fun of other people. Like, it's very interesting. So folks, please sign up. It's not even a long read. You By the time you realize you're at the end and you're like, oh my god, it's done. So sign up, get some of that Sewer Socialist low down, and then you can share it with your neighbors and families as well. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We have another episode. So this is going to run the last Friday of every month. So once a month, the last Friday, we'll put out a poster of who our next guest is. And if you have any thoughts on what we should be covering, questions, just shoot us. Send us, shouldn't say shoot, send us an email, Kojo's Corner Hammond at gmail.com. Hard to believe that was an hour. Yeah, Chris is great. That those 4 degrees are great. It turns an hour into 20 minutes. So and maybe I should put it this way: between your 4 and between my 3, that's 7. So
that's
there you go.
oh, that's the more the better.
Okay, thank you everyone. We'll see you next month, last Friday, in April. Thank you all. Take care.